Hello, everybody. This is Charlie and Nicole, who are the co-hosts of the podcast To Hell and Back, where we talk about people dealing with adversity in their lives and how they get into that adversity, how they get through it, how they get out of it, what kind of skills they use, what they learn. And we're having literally a fourth podcast about the loss of a young man that you may have listened to earlier ones. They're very recent if you want to check them out. And the young man is Ross. Ross took his own life a little over 2 years ago in May of 2020. And we talked to his mother for 2 podcasts about Ross and about how she has coped with the past 2 years, trying to get through the time. And then we talked to someone named Mariah, who is the fiance of Ross's brother, Teddy. And now we're having the opportunity to talk with Teddy. So it's a lot of different angles, and I think it really is deserved because this is a topic that sometimes people don't talk about, like when somebody takes their life and how did they cope with that and how did it happen and how are they doing now and how they get through it. And so the hope is that by talking about this from these different angles, that people out there over the coming days and years can tune into this and get some help thinking about what people go through and how they go through it. So we have with us Teddy, and Teddy was Ross's brother and was right in the middle of this loss and is still coping with it, of course, 2 years later. And so we're getting the opportunity to talk with Teddy about what his experiences are. And that's going to include, like, who was Ross to him? The good, the bad, and the ugly, everything about Ross. And as you'll hear, there's a lot of good, and there's also a lot of challenge. And then there's and about how it's been for Teddy. So, Teddy, thank you so much for being willing to come on. I know you've been settling into a new house, and you've just made a trip to somebody's wedding, and you've just made a trip out of the country, and sort of it's amazing that we have you here. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Definitely a little bit tired, but yep, ready to go.
Good. All right. So look, I mean, you heard what this is about, and we don't have, as we discussed just before we started, none of us have created a script for this. It's just going to be a conversation. And so I wonder if you could just start by saying a little bit so people know a little bit about who you are, where you are, what you do in your life, and then we'll sort of go into sort of your who Ross was to you as a brother and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I am 30 years old. I am living in Scarborough, Maine, which is like 10 minutes south of Portland. Both my fiance Mariah and I work from home, so that's where we're at for the most part now since the pandemic. So I just turned 30. We lost Ross when I was 27. I'm 3 years older than Ross. And I guess if we want to get into kind of our relationship a little bit, I was thinking about that before this conversation. And I really think the best and quickest way to describe it is like we were really, like, I would say, brothers in a more general sense for the first maybe 16, 17 years of his life. And then a lot more like friends for the final 7. I think our relationship really changed a lot from when he was probably 17, maybe 16, and kind of up from that age. I think like it makes some sense too, because when you think about siblings, especially like in high school, 3 years is like a lot. But, you know,
Yeah.
you think of like a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old or whatever. It's a lot, but then that evens out pretty quickly.
Right.
Once you get into, you know, 18 to 21, 19, 22, whatever, that sort of thing, the differences kind of slip away a lot. And then in the like, you know, when he was probably 21, 22, 23, right through 24, I think we were pretty darn close in more of a friend kind of way, as opposed to like a sibling specific kind of way.
But Teddy, what does that mean? I mean, I grew up with 3 brothers. I have 2 sons. I'm very, very much know what it was like for me. But what was, when you say you became more like friends than brothers, what changed? What came and what went away?
I think, like, I guess when I'm saying like brothers, you know, I always liked Ross just as a person. I always liked being around him, and I always thought he was smart, but we didn't like connect as much, and we didn't really hang out as much. And that changed a lot as we got older, where we would just spend time, just the 2 of us, which I think was the biggest difference. We never really did that. It would be with family, with maybe some of his friends, but then we started hanging out like just us, like just going on drives, going out to eat, going to movies. Like we would, you know, and then once we're a little older, we'd go out to a bar or something. That changed, I think, things a lot and made us a lot closer. And also when you're in that sort of situation where you're one-on-one with someone, I think you just get a way better grip of who they are, and, you know, you form a better connection that is, you know, I think just a lot different than hanging out in groups of people, without a doubt.
Yeah, it's interesting that you said this. It catches me a little bit by surprise because of the conversations with Beth, your mother, his mother, where it sounded like he got to the point the last few years where he was so stuck at home, so much isolated in his room, so much dealing with, and something Mariah talked about too, is kind of like existential questions about life and what's the point of life and stuff like that. That I didn't realize that, like, he'd be going out with you. Like, would you go to their house and say, "Hey, Ross, do you want to go to the movies, or do you want to go to a bar or something like that?" I
think that's a good point. I guess it's cool that you have the recent podcast with my mom stuff. I'm thinking, like, for right now, at least right then, speaking of him, I'm thinking very in the positive there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I was thinking about like our relationship. I wasn't thinking about like the reality of his life was not good at all throughout those years. There were times where I probably was able to get him out of the house better than most people. I think I probably had the easiest time getting him to maybe go do something quick. Even if it was something simple, like, you know, go to a stupid restaurant or whatever. But there were times, and not just like 1 or 2, there were plenty of times where I also would go try to hang out with Ross. And on occasion, you know, I'd be traveling 2 hours specifically to hang out with Ross, and, you know, and I couldn't get him out of his room either. And that's a type of, you know, mental state or darkness that I have never like had in my life. I feel horrible for people that do have those feelings, because I'm not saying let's go to a party with a bunch of people and you're going to need to interact. I'm talking even go out for a drive, like just around town, and him saying no to that. I mean, that's a type of, that's a type of darkness that's very difficult for, I think, someone on the outside to understand. I think also that type of, if you get used to something like that, whether it's a friend or a family, and it happens enough, and you see them work through it, over time, I think it can become more normative or more normal when it's not. That's not normal behavior in the slightest. Like, that's really abnormal human, just that being locked in your room. I think you can get you can get pushed if you see it enough and you live with enough where you're like, this is a new normal, or it sort of works, but that's not great either.
Right. Did you have a way of understanding that he would say no when you would ask him sometimes to go out? Did you? And you say there was a lot of darkness. Would he share the darkness? Would he say, no, I'm too depressed? Or would he say, no, I'm caught up in my thoughts? Or no, I don't want to see the universe at all? Or would he just kind of like say no, and you'd have to wonder what's going on?
I would accept it for the most part, but never really fully understood it. He went through a lot of ups and downs where, there could be periods, and this is something that goes back to when he was, I don't know, 15 maybe or something. So when I say I'm trying to hang out with him, say in my, in his early 20s, I had been seeing some of this behavior for 5, 6, 7 years, So I really just accepted it. If he said no, okay, that is what it is. But as far as him giving an explanation, no, that would never really happen. And when we were having times that were good, I never really tried to poke him about that stuff. I think that's probably one of my weaknesses as well, is I don't like having a bad time with other people, so I don't like bringing up hard stuff. I try to keep things pretty much positive all the time. I think that's probably not a great trait in some senses. But I never really fully got a pure sense of what he was going through. I think I had my own ideas about it. And if I really dug into our conversations, I'm sure I could pick through things he said that would give me an idea, but it's hard on the spot to really think that through.
Yeah.
I'm curious about maybe going back in time a little bit, just when you guys were kids. What was your relationship as kids, and what were your impressions of him as a kid? Was there evidence of, any of his later struggles in your mind? Did you feel protective of him then? What was the picture of your early childhood?
Well, we actually got along pretty well. We had just fights and stuff as brothers, but we got along pretty well. I think everyone, including myself, but we all knew he was very smart, like since forever. I think that kind of like wasn't great for him sometimes. Just his intellect, I think, that backfired in a lot of places in his life. But when he was little, there were times too that, like, he had problems that probably were a little outside of the norm in school, with adults and stuff. Not so much with me, but I would say there were some things that, he definitely struggled with. I think as an older brother, I felt somewhat protective of, and for sure. But that definitely got more so as we got older. I think, when you're 7, 8 yourself and your younger siblings, 4 or something, you're not really thinking about much yourself. What's that? First grade, you're just drawing pictures and, talking about.
I mean, you're saying that, Teddy, but I just have to tell you, in contrast to that, in my raising, my wife and me raising our 2 sons, they were 4 years apart, sort of not too different than your situation. You're 3 years, and when my older one was 7, and we were at a playground, and he was sitting on this elephant or something that he was riding on, and this little girl came up and shoved him off the elephant, like knocked him on the ground. His 3-year-old brother came up and punched the girl, So even the younger one will sometimes step in and protect.
Yes, yes, and I definitely had protectiveness without a doubt, but as far as looking back at different things, as far as realizing some things might have been some of his struggles at a younger age. The only thing I can think of is he was kind of a crazy little bastard. I mean, he was kind of nuts. I just thought a lot of kids were kind of nuts, but he was he would run over and he would kick adults in the shin or headbutt people, and he would do some crazy stuff. But at a young age, I always thought oh yeah, little kids are sometimes crazy.
Right.
But looking back as an adult, some of that stuff was probably who knows, but yeah, he learned how to swear at a very young age. So he loved swearing and he would be a 3-year-old telling my dad to go fuck himself or fuck you. And other parents would just be like, what in the world is going on with that little kid?
Right.
Yeah. So he had some crazy stuff going on, but I didn't think of that as being too
one of the
problematic.
One thing that your mom said about him was that he was probably the source of the most laughter and the most crying that they've ever done.
I would agree with that. Yep. I think that's definitely true. Also, at say a family gathering or something, there's a lot of good raw stories from when he was younger because he just did some really crazy, funny stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great looking back on that. I wouldn't say until, a little bit older that he started running into some bigger issues socially, maybe 12, 13, 14 sort of period, perhaps, maybe even earlier, to be honest.
It's so interesting that everybody, your mother and Mariah and you, all have commented on how smart he was. And I don't know there's a million different kinds of intelligence, of course, but there was a certain kind of smartness that he must have had that was very noticeable or wouldn't have everybody commenting on it. And then for some reason, I'm also drawing a link between that in my mind and the fact that he went on and your mom took him to an audition and he started acting and winning lead roles immediately. There's something about his presence,
I think he's always he was always able to kind of understand the world at a level that was a lot higher than probably his age per se. That's probably the quickest way I can describe it. But he would understand a lot of stuff about complex whatever. He'd read crazy books that say 15 that maybe, a 20-year-old would better understand. And then at 20, he'd be reading stuff that 40-year-olds would better understand. But, complex stuff. And I think honestly, one of the issues he ran into with being smart like that is thinking he could kind of resolve all his issues by himself without really ever asking for real help.
Yeah.
And I think that was a problem. A big one, because it doesn't matter how smart you are, you're going to need some help at some point in your life. And pretty much all the time, people need help in most aspects of their life through time. And if you try to fix everything, especially if you're having struggles with mental illness by yourself, that's a pretty tough rabbit hole to be jumping down.
Right. Right. So what?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, I was just thinking, one thing I know about you, but I don't know it from you. I know about you because your mother and your fiance is how important friendships have been to you and your friends. And it makes me wonder, like when you guys were little boys in the household and stuff, did that start early? Did you already have like friends you would do stuff with or that you would hang out with, and Ross tended to be more isolated? Or did he have friends too? Or did he hang out with you and your friends?
So I'm still, incredibly good friends with someone I met when I was 3 years old. And I still see him all the time, and I lived with them for like 3 years, a couple of years ago with Mariah and stuff. Joe, my friend Joe, I met him in preschool. We were very good friends through kindergarten, right through, grade school, college, high school, whatever. And for Ross, he never had a friend kind of like that when he was very young. I think he had some very good friends from, I'd say, like maybe late grade school period to early high school sort of age.
Mm-hmm.
Like his friend Ela. And then a little bit later, his friend Alex. They were both excellent friends of his, but not from growing up through life. And for me, I guess that definitely was a big differentiator, because another one of my really good friends who I still keep in touch with and see, I met when I was 6 years old. So, right there, those are people I've grown up with, shared everything in life through, and Ross never had really that system there,
mm-hmm.
and that support. And I think that's also tough. And it must have been tough too, for him to see that, see that from his older brother. I always had someone to hang out with. I've never, that's a difference that I think could be hard to see in a sibling. It's like, I don't have someone to hang out with right now, and Teddy kind of can go do his thing.
Right.
I would imagine that's tough.
No, I know your father would, heard this from, well, I've heard this several places, but I heard this from your father because I spoke to him after Ross had taken his life. And then I would hear from your mother that your father would do this thing that it's in your family, but I've never heard of it in my life until I've met you guys, is what's called random rides, which is like just hop. I mean, but I've done it myself, but I never called it random rides, but sort of like just hop in the car and go. And she said sometimes that's all he would do. Like he'd be willing to just get in the car and go. And it sounds like maybe there was your own version of random rides if you would go there and just say, hey, Ross, let's go. Let's go to a restaurant.
100%. I think, that's probably, I'm sure other people do it. Maybe they don't call it random rides, but I would think that's probably more specific to folks that are outside of cities or, more rural areas, because, who wants to drive in a car for 3 hours through traffic by choice? That's
right.
not an enjoyable thought. But we would go on rides sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it could be 2-3 hours, just through New Hampshire, Vermont, not with the destination in mind, but we would always find something to do. And I think that was one of the things Ross loved doing, and one of the things that he would do even on some pretty low points in his life. He would still do that. Mm-hmm. And I did that plenty with him as well, just me and him, like when he was in probably his 20s. And we did that a lot too. And sometimes, we'd have a destination sometimes. But often you're just cruising around talking about whatever shit comes to mind, and it's a pretty cool thing. And I miss that a lot. It's something I don't really do with anyone else. I can't think of a friend that I would call up and say, let's go for a 3-hour drive for no reason.
Right.
But yeah, so that's something that was pretty unique with Ross and my dad as well. And my dad and I aren't going to do that now that Ross is gone. It's also just an aspect of life that's kind of history, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so as things got closer to where he took his life in 2020, like, was your experience of that whole period that he was having more trouble? He was more isolated. He was more anxious. He was more worried. He was more preoccupied. I mean, did you sort of see a darkness setting in, or didn't it seem that much different?
There was certain things that you could tell there was like some darkness that was, say you compare it to your average person, you would think that's extreme darkness. But relative to Ross's past, say, 10 years, it was maybe just slightly darker.
I see.
And that's kind of that new normal I was talking about, where you get used to things that aren't normal, and it's not really good. He did. I mean, there were some things he did get stopped by the police for drinking and driving. 6 weeks, 7 weeks before. I think that was, something that was hanging over him, and that's a tough thing to go through. I went through it when I was 18. DUIs, that sucks. It's not a good process. I think that, he kind of made a mess of the living room one day, which was kind of a little bit darker than what, he usually he would lock himself in his room. I wasn't at the house at the time. I was in Hanover at Mariah's house. But I got back and he had just made a mess of the living room, throwing cigarettes on the ground, and beer bottles, and just didn't give a shit about clearly, which was definitely. And I talked to my mom about that the day that happened, and about other, things there. And it's just hard to know what means what. And it's really hard to know just how out of the norm something is when someone's been out of the norm for a decade, or more. When, it's hard to get a sense of what to do there.
Well, I think it's really hard, Teddy, because part of why it's hard is that you're not, like you say, you're used to a very abnormal situation where with somebody else, you could come back to a brother and say, what the hell? I mean, what did you do here? What's going on here? And they might be able to explain something. But you didn't have access to what was going on in him some of the time. I mean, I know it seems that he was a closed book in some ways, and yet probably thinking nonstop about stuff.
Yes, I totally agree. I mean, he was definitely thinking nonstop. I mean, because he was reading nonstop, and I think the thing that would have been tough is if I had try to get a sense of what was going on. That I don't think that would have gone really anywhere.
Right.
And it's not even really, it's more of a knowing than a thought. I just kind of know that wouldn't have gone anywhere.
Right.
And that's a difficult situation to be in as a sibling as well. I also, just as a brother too, I for the most part just wanted to just not treat him any differently as anyone else. He was my friend. and I didn't want him, like, that was always something I struggled with. I'm sure someone that's got more experience or some therapist would say, you shouldn't have been treating him so much as a friend, maybe, or setting some boundaries. But I just, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I just always treated him exactly as a friend. So I never did anything different, really. But also that made it hard. I didn't want to like drag him down more than he might have already been. So I didn't try to drill him on, why he was feeling a certain way. So that's tough too.
Yeah, it is tough. It is tough. No, you're having to, like you said, it just stays with me what you said, that you were coping with what had gradually become an abnormal situation for a long time. And so the patterns of communication were very strange. I mean, and maybe if you went on a random ride with him, like conversation might happen. But other than that, deliberate conversation, going to someone like him and saying, what's going on, might go nowhere. Or tell me why you're staying in your room, might go nowhere. Or why did you mess things up, might go nowhere. It's you're living with you're living with somebody who's caught up in his own deep and troubled thoughts, I think.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that makes it really tough, and it depends on what someone is struggling with. But, when Ross was having good days, like, which was often, when he was feeling good, it was really normal. Like, I'm not, we would go hang out. We went to Thanksgiving together a couple years ago. Oh, what was that? 3.5? Or yeah, I'm not sure. But we hung out with family. We've gone to bars. We've gone to, like restaurants. We've done like social things. When he was feeling well, there wasn't like, because we were having so much fun just doing nice stuff together. There wasn't a time where I was going to ever like grab him and be like, why last week were you feeling so shitty? Like, why'd you lock yourself in there? Like we were having a good time. I'm not going to go there and do that. That's tough because I wouldn't want to. Yeah, exactly. And that also as a sibling, I think you could be at danger of becoming almost like a parent.
Right. Or even worse, or a therapist, even worse.
Yeah. And that's something that also, is that's something that I definitely, I struggled with. I think probably a lot of siblings struggle with if someone's dealing with mental health crisis. Because you don't want to become a parent, but you also do want to help, and talk about a fine line to toe there. I mean, I don't know how you really do that because that's tough.
Well, it seems like you just have boundless kind of sensitivity to and compassion, or that you've had that for him, throughout most of your life. And I think Mariah was really, when she talked about first meeting Ross and being a little bit nervous because it was so clear to her how important he was to you, that you were protective of him, and that it really mattered that she made a good impression. And I'm just curious, given that I think for some siblings, when there is one child in a family that takes a lot of attention, that maybe is that maybe takes a lot more of a parent's time and attention when you're growing up. There can be sibling rivalry, there can be resentment, and it seems like you just never ever responded this way with Ross. You just had seemingly infinite resources of generosity, of care, compassion, of love for him. And I'm curious how that operates or operated for you.
I think a lot of that is just like, I'm trying to think of a way to describe it. I think it's almost like dumb luck. Like just I was just kind of like, I'm pretty patient just as a person. So that's something I would assume you're kind of born with, is patience, or maybe you can develop it. I don't know, but I've always been pretty patient. And then also kind of going back to like friendships, I've always had some incredibly close, strong friendships that are similar to similar to a brother in a lot of ways. And I just like going through, high school for me, I knew, cause we went through some rough stuff as a family. I knew like, how much shit Ross went through. And like, I saw him when he was, I forget, maybe like 15 or something, or 15 or 14. He got kind of hauled away to a facility that for people struggling. And, I visited one of the places he was at in Utah, which is, they're not bad places, but they're, it's still dark in its own sense when, especially say I'm like 18 or whatever, and I'm in high school living a perfectly normal high school experience, like, and then to juxtapose that to what Ross was going through, it's pretty easy if you're like a normal person, I think, to have compassion for that. I saw it for so many years that like, it just, I think it's easy to feel bad for that situation, especially since I think I've realized, and I was able to realize that I've lived like a pretty privileged life. I think just even through like just friends and, having a good high school experience, good college experience, like, just great relationships, like with my friends and Mariah. So I think as far as compassion and stuff goes, I think it's been more just kind of luck or easiness of it, not me trying there. That's what I would say.
Well, it's still pretty remarkable.
So Teddy, it's you get to May of 2020, and your parents were out of the country, or out of part of the country.
Yeah.
They were out of the States. They were in Hawaii during this time when he took his life, and that you were the closest to this, and that I think you were the person who discovered that he had taken his life. I wonder, without violating your own sense of what feels comfortable enough to share, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit, like what happened? What happened?
So I guess I had been, because I've been bouncing back and forth between New London and Hanover, and those are towns separated by about, say, 45 minutes, because Mariah's family is from Hanover. So I would hang out this was like the big part of the pandemic where no one knew what the hell was going on. So, right. You couldn't do anything. You couldn't go anywhere. So I was hanging out with Ross for a few days, and I'd go to Mariah's house and be there. And I was doing that for at least, 2 or 3 weeks. And I would just kind of show up at the house whenever, it could be Saturday, whatever, Sunday. This particular day was just a Monday morning at whatever, like 8:30 in the morning. And yeah, I definitely don't want to get into too many real details of it, but I found him and had to deal with the police and just whatever panic shit was going on there. The mental drain of that is insane. And like, even directly after, my cousin Ryan and my friend Joe drove up from Boston, at a drop of the hat, and were there in like 2 hours. Just having even that sort of support at that moment, is pretty vital. I think, without Mariah and Joe and Ryan and just Mariah's parents, and like almost like without the it's almost like distraction, I guess, or just without the external stuff going on, I think getting in my own head after that was pretty brutal. So I can remember well, like even I think it was like 3 days after, pretty much the first time I was alone again was a car ride from Hanover to New London. And I remember just even that being really, really tough, where it was like only 45 minutes, but just mentally, just having no external stuff going on, just being purely in my head was pretty horrible. It's hard to describe, to be honest. And also following it's like these images, these really bad things would stay. It was like, it would be in my brain, like the morning I woke up. So it would be like as soon as I woke up, I would just have this horrible, almost like a weird panic attack of sorts, where I was just seeing the shit that just all of it, and it, and that lasted for a long time, actually, probably 2 months. And yeah, just in general, I think having like healthy distractions helped a lot. I obviously coped in ways that were unhealthy. I drank a shit ton often after that for a little while there. I couldn't really sleep without kind of getting drunk. Just it was good coping and bad coping. I started running kind of longer distances, and so it's just kind of a mess for whatever, like months, just kind of like a mess. I still kept working, but it was still kind of like, it's almost like working while trying to be in some nightmarish dream. Like I didn't really get much done. I just, so it's pretty like looking back to it, pretty insane, just period there. And it doesn't really seem real even now, which is, I think, weird to think about. Because even now, after 2.5 years, there's a part of my brain where I think, oh, I could just pick up the phone and call Ross if I needed to. I still think that.
Right. So you were thinking that even those first couple of months. I mean, would you keep, like, when you wake up in the morning and have these nightmarish experience, was like, oh my God, this really happened? Was it that kind of thing? Like, I can't believe this really happened, because maybe you think you'll wake up in the morning and it won't be true.
It was that, but then also it was like the imagery of what I went through it was the weirdest thing. I don't know why my brain was like this, but every morning it would just be like a slap in the face, where it would just be like, you went through that. Like, you're going to think about that. Like, it was pretty crazy just to wake up like that. And it was not a good thing to go through. I'm glad that things do change, and that doesn't happen, not in that type of way. But yeah, for a while there, that's kind of what it was, just kind of like the beginning of my day. That's just kind of what I did.
So you describe a situation where it's kind of like the inner part of your life. I mean, in your inner life, a nightmare had unfolded, and you had been through something, and it kept coming back. Meanwhile, you're distracted with your friends, and you're doing your work. And but the way you described that, I've never heard it quite like that before. That you're at the same time you're doing your work and you're going through a nightmare inside, and like something like that.
Without a doubt. I mean, I'm very, very lucky to have the network I do. Because I think it could become kind of, I at least for me, I think it would be easier to kind of get in a really, really dark place yourself, without trying to be around people that mean a lot, at least for me. I think maybe that's partially because I'm kind of like extrovert by nature. So I like being around people. That's kind of a more comfort place for me. So that being around people helped a lot. Friends, family. We did, even in the period that was really dark, we did some nice things. We had a camping trip a couple months after. We did some golf with family. I went to Somerville and back a number of times. So being distracted can help a lot, but it doesn't mean that you're out of this nightmare. It's still there. It's just like you're like, yeah, it's like almost turning your head. It's like it's still there in the periphery, but you're focused at the moment. You're like, oh no, I've got my friends and we're doing a nice thing. But you can see it there. Like it's pretty fucked up. And like then, just realizing sometimes that it's real is not a good thing either. And that still happens till now, after whatever, 27 months, that still happens today.
How do you talk to yourself in moments when it's really hard?
That's a good question. I guess the biggest thing to me is I saw firsthand just like a real pain and struggle often that Ross went through. And I guess kind of just talking to myself, just knowing that he doesn't, he's doesn't have to do that, and he's not doing that. And, that helps to some degree. But, obviously there's also all the good times too that, or some movie or song I'd love to send to him that I can't do. But I think as far as talking to myself and trying to help my brain and not hurt it more, I would say I try to think that, a lot of that struggling that I saw it's not happening for him now. But I don't know. It doesn't help a ton.
I remember your mom said,
Mariah said something. And
go ahead.
Go ahead, Nicole.
I'm not just saying. I remember your mom said something about you wanted to be really sure that Ross was certain, that he was really that he was really certain about this decision that he made, that there was no ambivalence, and that was really helpful for you, at least, helpful as things could be possibly, but what he really wanted. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just like what that was like for you to kind of wrap your mind around that this was a choice that he made maybe to get out of pain?
Yeah. I think one of the things that I struggle with is, for instance, like you hear those stories where someone might jump from a bridge and they survive, and they say they realized in the air that they didn't want to do this. And I, without going into the details of what Ross did, he tried and failed and moved and tried and succeeded. That's a lot of time. That's a lot more than a few seconds in the air off a bridge. That's right. A lot of time to think through what you're doing and be in harm's way and come out of harm's way and put yourself back in it. I do think about that where, he was in that moment, at least, or that whole night, he was certain and
now he showed determination, I guess.
Yes. And it, I think it ties back in some ways to how mentally smart and tough he was. I mean, he was at a place in, I forget, Utah or somewhere with the help people that struggle with mental illness. And he went on like a 10-day or 11-day hunger strike or something, which I think was the longest any kid. It's like the longest any kid's ever gone at this facility. And, you know, he was really, you know, like mentally, like obviously troubled, but tough and smart and, you know, and determined.
Determined. You know, your mother said, it reminds me of one thing your mother said about him is that she said, like, if you put a kid in a timeout for misbehavior, you could put him in a timeout and say how many minutes he was going to have to be in the timeout, and he wouldn't come out of it. He would just like stay in the timeout.
Yeah.
The way she described it made me think he could still be in that timeout today. Like he had a certain determination, like you're not going to punish me. I'm going to out punish myself beyond anything you can imagine.
Yeah, that is something that would happen. And it's funny too, because a lot of the time too, my dad couldn't even put him in a timeout. He would just stand up at, you know, little 4-year-olds standing up to adults. It's just like it's pretty crazy to see. I mean, what are you going to do? Like tie him up and put him in a corner? Like he just wouldn't listen sometimes. It was wild. He's stubborn. And I think, I know like the stubbornness carries through as an adult for him when he was struggling. I always thought therapy would be an awesome thing for him to do, but it was also clear that if it wasn't his choice, that shit was never going to happen. And even if you know, put chains on him and put him in a room, he could go to therapy 1,000 hours and not do a thing if he had to. I mean, it needed to be his choice. And I think I was always I was always sad that he never made that choice. Especially as an adult. I think if he found someone he liked speaking with, it could have really helped him quite a bit. But
yeah, boy. I mean, and I know that because in those 2 years before he ended his life, your mother would meet with me now and then and talk about him and try to think of every way possible to get him to go see somebody. She wanted him to come and see me, meet with me. She wanted to trick him into coming to see me because he wouldn't come. You know, she said, well, because they sell marijuana down in Northampton and we could go down there together and you're out of marijuana. Now let's go buy some marijuana. And then, oh, by the way, let's stop by and see Charlie. I mean, I think she just was thinking of everything she could to get him to somehow see somebody. But it sounded like he was, like you said, the kind of person who, you know, he had his mind. His mind was a very powerful instrument. And it was not, you couldn't sort of get him to do stuff that he didn't want to do.
I think that's got to be one of the biggest struggles for our family, really, and probably a lot of families is, you know, people that are stubborn. There's especially adults that are very stubborn. I mean, and you know, you're not really gonna force anyone into something. That a lot of it has to be their own choice. I know we did a group class at McLean a number of years ago with families that had loved ones that were struggling, and I remember other parents in that as well saying, you know, that's the hardest thing. If someone is a younger person, there are some ways it seems like where you can kind of push them into doing some stuff, but adults, if someone's an adult and they're stubborn, you can't, you know, you can help them try to, you know, find their way there, but you're never going to be able to just push them into it. It just seems like, especially with Ross, like there was just no way.
No way.
That would've
No way. No way. I would hear of all of your mother's efforts to figure out. Your mother seemed to have a nonstop job figuring out what to do to try to get him help, and it was just very, very difficult. And so, and she was so grateful that Ross had a brother, even in spite of all the hardship that Ross had, and however difficult he felt life to be, and however pointless he found life to be, that you would show up and he'd go do something, and you and Mariah would show up and he would go and do something with you guys. You were like a trio, is the way Mariah was putting it.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that I hope he didn't think, and I don't think he did, but I was never really trying to like make him better or help him. Like, yeah, especially as an adult, like I was just being his friend and his brother. Like I was trying to treat him no different than anyone else. That's what I did. I don't know if that was right or wrong or whatever, but like I one of the things I do think about a lot is if I could tell him something, I would just want him to know that he was one of my best friends. I wasn't acting or trying to trick him into having fun. I was just being his friend. It was a legit thing. Right. I don't know if he knew that fully. I hope he did. But that's one of the things I do think about a lot. Just, I was just, I was just there, just doing stuff together. I wasn't, really trying to like cure him or do any tricks or anything. I'm not that sneaky. I was just trying to like.
Let me tell you, it's sort of like a chess game. He's a better chess player than you were, if it were up to that. And I relate to this, Teddy, because as a therapist, sometimes I've worked with pretty stubborn people, and I find that everything I try to do when they know I'm trying to do something doesn't work. And then finally, when something finally happens where there's a little breakthrough, it's probably when I gave up being a therapist. And I just come in and finally with this current 16-year-old boy that I once worked with, who wouldn't talk to me for 3 months, literally wouldn't talk to me for 3 months. He had that same level of stubbornness that your brother had, and I would try everything under the sun, and I talked to other people, and nothing is working, right? And so I come in one day, and I just decided, fuck it, I'm done. I've been fired. I've failed as a therapist. And I sat down and I thought, what am I going to talk about? So I told him about a problem that I had with my own son, my 2-year-old, but that something had happened the day before that was troubling. And suddenly he's interested. The second I signed off as being his therapist, he's like, says, oh, and what happened to you? And what happened to your son? I thought, whoa, who's this person? So I do think that Ross would probably sense people trying to get him to do stuff. And he had a bad experiences of that as his wilderness camps that your mother told us about. So it's kind of like, he maybe already was that kind of person. So the fact that he had you who just wanted to be with him and wasn't trying to like foist some agenda on him or trick him out of his isolation, probably really good. And your dad seems to have the same quality. No agenda. You just show up. And you accept it if he can't go. That's hard too. When you said you drive 2 hours to see him, and then he says no, it's like, okay, that requires you calling on the patience that you said you have to not sort of smack him in the head, at that point.
It's definitely because I think I already spoke to this, but it's a tough line though, because, as a sibling, you do want to actually help, like in a progressive manner. But I don't know if that's a place for like a brother or sister, really. I don't know, at least, for me, I didn't think it was. I just don't know, because I just always worried so much about turning into another parent, the third parent. And that was my biggest worry often I was thinking, often I would think through, like, I could I could have agendas here and try stuff, but it's like, that from my experience seems like a slippery slope. And I definitely could be wrong about that. And maybe I was wrong about that, but that's just what I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you had good
Wow.
instincts.
I hope so.
Teddy, we're going to stop in just a minute, and I just wonder, was there anything you had in mind leading into this that you wanted to make sure and say, if you're imagining somebody listening to this who's maybe in a situation like you've been in?
I guess for someone in a situation similar to myself, I would just want someone to know that period after it does change. And as far as saying in general, for me, it's been 2.5 years, saying in general that it gets better would be a lot. It doesn't get better, but it changes a lot. And that panic attacky, overwhelming monster freaking cloud of a life I had those months following, that changes a lot. And it's still dark sometimes, for damn sure, but that was, I could see people being in that period and just thinking that shit's never going to end. Because that's what I thought. I was like, this is going to be the rest of my fucking life, this stuff. But it does change, and it did for me, and I would assume for most people it would. But that crazy cloud has dissipated some, and that is, I would just hope people would hear that.
Yeah. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's really huge.
So Teddy, thank you. I mean, you never know with these podcasts, what's going to strike somebody. There could be something that you think was the least important thing you said. Somebody's listening and says, oh my God. I mean, because you don't know where other people are coming from, but we really appreciate that you just were willing to get into the detail about what you went through and what he's like, what you're like, and how that worked. I mean, without knowing what the outcome will be, and coming off of a lot of travel and making a move and everything. So thanks for being willing to do that. And I just want to say, other than the fact that when we went to Mount Major and we hiked up Mount Major, which you played a huge role in, you were the leading fundraiser because all your friends came out and everybody donated and everybody showed up, and all of a sudden your mother just thought, oh, we'll do this little thing, and it became quite a big thing all of a sudden very fast. It was very meaningful to me to be walking up there with you guys. I just wish that you weren't such a good hiker, because I got left behind by you and your father. You and your father are both such amazing. Well, your mother is too. You're all such amazing hikers, and I just haven't done as much hiking. So. But it was very nice to be with you. And I wanted to tell you what we told Mariah too, is that she didn't seem to know this, but on my website where these things get posted, there's a gallery that got linked to your mother's podcast with photographs that include one photograph with you and Mariah and your mother and father at the top of Mount Major. I don't know if you remember that photograph being taken. Mariah remembered it because she was not going to be in it, and then your mother said, come on. It was very nice. But some of those pictures are quite special too. If you were ever telling anyone else about this podcast and checking it out, if they to see the pictures, there's some very nice pictures of Ross among the ones that are there. So thank you a lot.
Thank you.
And
yeah, thanks for having me do this. I hope for someone or sibling or someone, it's helpful to hear the story.
I'm sure it will. There's no question. All right. We're going to sign off. All right. Here we go.